nothing like firing up the old live stream machine on a Monday morning. Thought we would just roll through. I was actually working on like some stats and some numbers, some interesting numbers about Pitt football after the win at Cincinnati, and was just about finished. I was going to do 10 numbers, and I think I was all the way up to number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You know, it was like I was one day away from retirement. You know, I was almost finished with that. But instead, the news comes out, and shout out to Chris Carter, our friend at the Post-Gazette, for breaking the news. Pitt has fired Heather Lyke as director of athletics. And this news comes in the aftermath of a number of events over the past month or so, past few weeks, I guess. I forget when exactly the near-miss Armageddon was. A couple of weeks ago with the Northwestern job. Obviously, that created an interesting situation as Heather Lyke was interviewing for the Northwestern job. A lot of things I think came to light during that week in light of her interviewing for that Northwestern job, and maybe about the position she's in at Pitt and how she had done at Pitt and kind of where she stood with the Pitt's new chancellor, one-year chancellor, Joan Gable. And I think we got a lot of insight into that situation and that relationship. And as I say, Heather Lyke's position at Pitt. And it was clear that it was a bit more tenuous than probably a lot of people thought. Probably a bit more tenuous than was perceived from the outside. And now this today. And, in the aftermath of Heather Lyke not getting the Northwestern job, there was sort of an expectation she would be signing a new contract sometime soon. Even if it was just for 1 year. Her contract was set to expire this year, 2024. There was an expectation she would, from what we understood, Pitt was offering her a short-term deal, a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal, something short-term, something less than what she wanted. And that might have been at least part of the motivation in seeking out the Northwestern job, to try to get a longer contract offer out of Pitt. That contract offer did not come. And certainly after the Northwestern job went to someone else, well, any leverage that might have existed went out the door. So, Heather Lyke back to the negotiating table, I would think, with Pitt. Looking at potentially the 1-year deal or the 2-year deal that was being offered, only to have this be the outcome. Now, I don't know what happened over the past 2 weeks. I have to imagine it was at least somewhat acrimonious. And probably, some difficulty in the negotiating process. Again, when you lose all leverage, as Heather Lyke probably did in the aftermath of Northwestern hiring someone else, I suspect that the tone changed. And, was it irreparable? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate too much on what happened in the last week or two since the Northwestern kerfluffle, but the end result is here. The Pitt has decided to move on and find a new athletic director. And it's interesting because Heather Lyke was at Cincinnati for the Pitt game. As our guy Jim Hammett, who was at the game, said she seemed to be conducting business as usual. And here we are Monday morning, and Heather Lyke is no longer the director of athletics at Pitt. And so we decided, you know what? Look, there's other things to do on a Monday morning, other work things, want to get a head start on stuff for the week, but we got to go live. We got to do a live stream here to talk about this. And given you guys are already rolling in with the comments and the questions, it's clear that you want to talk about it as well. So we'll probably do this until about 11 o'clock. We're not going to go like an hour and a half or something like that, because Pat Narduzzi has a press conference today at noon. All of a sudden, there's a new topic to ask him about. But we will talk here for the next 45 minutes or so. Get your thoughts on Pitt firing Heather Lyke. I'll share my thoughts on Pitt firing Heather Lyke. And, of course, the things we always ask you to do, like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then the website Panther-Lair.com. We didn't break this story. I'm not going to sit here and say that we break every story, and certainly Chris Carter of the Post-Gazette had this one, and shout out to him. Did a great job on reporting this one. But I do think what we offer you at Panther-Lair.com, we offer you a lot of news and information. And I think, in the midst of the Northwestern situation, I think we offered a lot of interesting context that maybe hadn't seen the light of day about Heather Lyke's tenure at Pitt. And that it hadn't really come out. And I think it shifted some of the opinions, and probably rightfully so. Because for all the things that have been accomplished in Pitt's athletic department under the last 7 years that Heather Lyke has been in charge. And I think there are accomplishments. I mean, I think there are results-based accomplishments, between volleyball success, the ascension of both soccer programs. Obviously, the ACC championship for football happened in that time. Men's basketball having a resurgence in the last 2 years. The wrestling program, I think, humming along and having success. I mean, there have been successes on the field. There's obviously a giant project going on next to the Peterson Event Center, so a major capital investment to build the Victory Heights project. Much long overdue and much needed updates to the Olympic sports facilities. All those go on her credit, and she's gotten a lot of national accolades. You routinely see her on lists of the top athletic directors in the country. She's found herself on a variety of boards and advisory committees and things like that. So I mean, there's certainly positives that you look at. But there are also certain realities about Pitt's athletic department, the state of Pitt's athletic department, and where it is right now in 2024, one of the most tumultuous eras of college sports. And you look at where Pitt's athletic department is, it's not exactly in a position of strength. And I'm not talking about the product that's being put out there. We're not talking about the fact that they came back from being down 21 on Saturday at Cincinnati. We're talking about the overall health of the athletic department and how it is positioned to move into this new era. And quite frankly, the fact that we talk about it as moving into this new era, this sort of present tense, future tense, moving into this new era, you need to already be in this new era. And the schools that are going to succeed in this new era have been adapting to it for the past 2 years, 3 years, whether it's NIL or the advent of revenue sharing, which I think most, leaders with vision and foresight probably anticipated and prepared for. And there are major questions about how prepared Pitt is for revenue sharing when it comes. How are you going to pay $20 to $22 million in revenue sharing when your budget was barely working out to be balanced to begin with? Are you going to, how much will you fund some of these sports? How will you come up with the money for scholarships when now there are no scholarship limits? There are a lot to add more scholarship players in all of these sports. How are you going to fund those sports? How are you going to fund those sports? What's the plan for funding those sports? Are you going to go to the limit for baseball? Are you going to go to the limit for softball? Are you going to go to the limit for football or men's basketball? What's the plan? And I think, and they're probably, and I don't want to sit here and speak for Joan Gable. If she would like to join us on a special edition of the Morning Pit, we could certainly do that and have a conversation. I would very much enjoy that. I'm not going to speak for her, but I think at least part of the problem and part of what probably led to Heather Lyke's dismissal, maybe what led to Pitt's hesitation about signing a long-term contract with Heather Lyke, is that there's no clear semblance of a plan. And this doesn't come from public comments. This doesn't come from the last time we sat down with Heather Lyke and said, so Heather, what's the plan for revenue sharing? Because we haven't sat down with Heather Lyke. And this is a whole other issue that I think exists. And I don't just say this as like a navel-gazing media weirdo, but Heather Lyke, if you look at her public comments with the local media, last November, she issued like a one-word sentence email to the Post-Gazette in response to questions about Pat Narduzzi's future. In August of last year, 2023, not 2024, in August of 2023, I think Noah Hiles did like a ride-along with her, a day in the life type of thing. And it was great. I mean, great job by Noah, but it wasn't exactly a chance for Heather Lyke to expound on some of the major issues facing college sports. And then the previous April 2023, not 24, but 23, Heather Lyke spoke to the local media unveiling new renderings of the Victory Heights project, which I think she went into, an event she went into expecting just to be an unveiling of the new renderings of the Victory Heights project, in which she was asked at certain points questions about like her contract situation as far back as April 23. She was almost sort of taken aback that such a question would be raised. It seemed unprepared or ill-prepared for that question to come up, failing to realize, I would think, that this is one of your rare public appearances. This is one of the rare times you're actually speaking to the local media. So yes, we are going to ask you about everything under the sun, because who knows the next time we'll get the chance to talk to you. As it turns out, there was no next time. And I think, and again, this is not just media wonkery, but at this point in college athletics, where we are right now in college athletics, you have to have a strong leader. And I think your leader has to be out front. Now, maybe that's the case, or maybe that's not the case for Ohio State and Alabama and Texas. Maybe their brand is strong enough to always remain prominent and relevant in the sport and in the industry of college athletics. But if you were Pitt, I think you need to have a leader who is always out there, who's commenting on things, who's talking about things, who is always available for questions about how are you going to handle revenue sharing? How have you embraced NIL? What's happening with this? What's happening with that? How is this going to work? How does Pitt move forward in the new era of college sports? And Heather Lyke was never available to answer those questions. Now, is that a reason to fire her because she doesn't do media availability? No. But when you take that sort of, I don't want to say hiding in the office because it sounds like I'm just sort of kicking dirt on somebody. And that's not what I'm here. But when you are just sort of staying out of the public light, and there's plenty of talk from sources throughout the athletic department and around the university and around athletics that Pitt is not prepared for what's coming, that Pitt has not been preparing for what's coming, that Pitt was unimaginably slow to embrace NIL and is not prepared for what's coming in revenue sharing, on top of the fact that the athletic department is seemingly in a pretty considerable amount of debt. You start asking questions about management and whether the athletic department has been managed to its best capabilities. How close is Pitt's athletic department to its ceiling? And have the last 7 years gotten it closer to that ceiling? And we could spend a lot of time sitting around talking about the Victory Heights project, whether that was a good investment, whether I shouldn't say was a good investment. It's a continuing project. It's a present tense situation. Whether that's a good investment or a bad investment, it doesn't matter. The money's spent. At this point, it doesn't matter. Were there other, we could have a long conversation down the road about, where we could go off on a sidetrack about, well, could they have found other options to upgrade the Olympic sports facilities? Could they have found other ways to accommodate volleyball and wrestling and these successful programs that need better facilities, that need upgrades? And I don't know. I'm not smart enough to answer that question. But I do know that's a $300 million hole in the ground next to the Peterson Event Center. And it's not just a hole in the ground anymore. It's things are being built there, and it's going to be fantastic when it's built. How many of those sports will they still be sponsoring when it's built? Because this is the other real question about that Pitt was facing and that Pitt continues to face is in this era of revenue sharing, there are going to have to be cuts. And those might be cuts in staff. Those might be cuts in administrative personnel. And these might be cuts in sports. And chances are it'll be all of that. What's the plan? Where's the plan? And I don't know. I think if Joan Gable asked that question of the athletic department, I'm not sure there was a concrete answer to come. And there are a lot of reasons for all of this. There's a lot that goes into this as far as the NIL question, the revenue sharing question, the overall financial, health of the athletic department. I mean, when you have people talking about this is an athletic department that might be in the red, to the tune of some of the worst in FBS, among FBS schools, you ask questions about management and mismanagement and financial decisions and how the whole operation has been run. And again, I don't want to spend, this 45-minute podcast just sort of, kicking dirt, because that's not my intention. That's not what I'm trying to do. But there are real questions about how things have been run for the past 7 years. And I think they're probably, the deeper you dig, I think the closer you look and the more you see, and the more you hear, and the more you find out about this athletic department, it was not in good shape. It's not in good shape. And it's going to take some real repair work done. And with the coaching hires and who's worked and who hasn't. And I think we did this a couple weeks ago. In the midst of the Northwestern stuff, I think we talked about a lot of these things, about 12 coaching hires in the last 7 years, which is, I don't know if that's average or above average, below average. It doesn't matter. It was what Heather Lyke felt needed to be done. But when we can talk about how successful those hires have been, you've already hired 2 women's basketball coaches. You've hired 2 gymnastics coaches. You were, pretty damn close to hiring a new men's basketball coach if that buyout wasn't as big as it was for Jeff Capel 2 years ago. Like, we could drill down on all of those sports, and we could find the successful ones and the unsuccessful ones. And we could look at, when we talk about volleyball or men's soccer or football, I mean, these are programs that have had success in the last 7 years, but were not hires made by Heather Lyke. Now, she extended the contracts and had to obviously support those coaches and support those sports to help them achieve at the level they were achieving. And at the same time, I think you could say that Heather Lyke probably had more support from university administration than most of her predecessors, I would say. Now, it was easier to say yes on some of those things with the ACC money rolling in, but Patrick Gallagher, I think, supported Heather Lyke more than, the support that, Steve Peterson got or Jeff Long or Steve Peterson the first time. And I mean, there was a lot of support from Mark Nordenberg for those athletic directors, but I think Heather Lyke's level of support, what she received, was far beyond anything her predecessors had seen. Scott Barnes probably would have gotten that support from Patrick Gallagher if he hadn't left. But then again, there's a part of me that thinks, hey, maybe because Scott Barnes left when he did and how he did, maybe Patrick Gallagher felt an increased sense of urgency to really get it right and make sure it worked with his next athletic director. Maybe he was even willing to say yes to more for Heather Lyke in order to increase the likelihood of it working out. That's speculation on my part. And again, that's all water under the bridge. I mean, because where they are right now is Pitt needs a new athletic director. I think I'm going to get into the comments and questions in a second. And of course, you guys have a lot to say, and I appreciate everybody jumping in this morning, kind of on a moment's notice. So it's pretty fun. What was I just going to say? I think at this point in time in college athletics, it's not ideal to be leaderless. And I shouldn't say leaderless because they've named Jen Toscano, who is a longtime Pitt person. One of these, there's a handful of people in that athletic department who are dyed blue and yellow. Like their blood is blue and yellow. Like, they believe in Pitt. And I genuinely believe they make decisions based on what they think is best for Pitt. Like, as they rank their priorities in making any given decision professionally, the number one priority is Pitt. Number 2 and 3 and 4, whatever else is on their resume or personal preference or whatever, the number one thing is Pitt. And the number of people who feel that way, who operate that way, has been dwindling over the years. Okay, it's been slowly going down. And Steve Peterson ran some off, and some left under Scott Barnes, and a bunch have left under a variety of circumstances under Heather Lyke. But there's still a handful of people in that department who truly are committed to the cause, who truly have no priority beyond Pitt. And Jen Toscano, who I think I read in the press release from the statement that was given to the Post-Gazette from Joan Gable, I think Jen Toscano was named the interim AD. She's one of those, and she has been here a long time. It means something. It's important to her, and she's a good person to have in charge. But in terms of having a permanent athletic director, it's not an ideal time to be without that. I don't want to say leaderless or rudderless or anything like that, but you need leadership at this point in college athletics. But maybe this gives an opportunity for Joan Gable, for the Pitt Board of Trustees, and the Pitt Athletic Department overall to find someone who, like, you go into this athletic director search with a very specific intention and a very specific set of qualifications of what you're looking for. You need someone who's going to walk in and tell you how they're going to manage revenue sharing, how they're going to get this athletic department out of the red, or at least not quite as far in the red as they are right now, and how they're going to further embrace, foster, develop, and enhance the NIL efforts. Those are the three biggest things. The Victory Heights Project, it's too far. Like, you can't walk back from that right now. It's too far along. And I don't know if you can downsize it or adjust it to make it a little bit more financially viable. But the university took on a lot of debt for that thing. So, maybe it's not all in the athletic department's, balance sheet. But like what's done is done there. And you obviously have all the sort of traditional duties of an athletic director of, supporting the coaches and facilities and hires and contract extensions and making those kind of decisions. But the number one priority and what every question needs to be about when you're sitting down in these interviews with new athletic director, with athletic director candidates, you have to find out, how would you approach revenue sharing? How are you going to make this work so that Pitt's biggest revenue producing sports can be competitive in this next era of college athletics? How are you going to address revenue sharing? How are you going to embrace, develop, foster, and enhance the NIL efforts? And that means working with Alliance 412. That means doing everything legal and working like crazy to find how far you can stretch that, definition of legality to get the money where it needs to go. What are you going to do there? And then finally, how are you going to get us closer to the black? Might not get fully out of the red. Maybe most athletic departments across the country don't operate really in the red, but you could be a lot closer than Pitt is right now. Those are the biggest priorities. Those are the things the new athletic director has to address. And those are the things that the new athletic director hire should be based on. Those have to be the priorities for Joan Gable. Have to be. And if you find someone who doesn't answer those questions, you can't hire them. There has to be a plan. All right, let's get into some comments and questions. There's a lot of you guys on here. This is a big Troutman. I don't think you're the real Chevy Troutman, but it'd be funny if you were. It says, someone find Randy Jewell. Yeah, man, where's Randy Jewell at these days? Hopefully he's retired and just enjoying it and sitting back. Eric Bruno says, this is a bit unexpected. Curious as to why Lyke was let go. That's I think a few of the things that I just talked about. A lot of these comments came in right at the beginning. So some of these things we addressed. But I mean, Eric, I think it's a lot of the things we talked about. Tyler S. says, Louis Riddick, come on down. I don't know. He got brought up. So when it looked like Heather Lyke might go to Northwestern, he got brought up. But and he's a visible face. It's great. But like, we're past the point, and this has nothing to do with Louis Riddick. Like, he might be a great candidate for this job. But there was a point, if you remember 10 years ago, 15 years ago, just make Dave Wanstead the athletic director. Dave, he can shake hands and get the boosters all excited and raise some money. No. There's no glad handing anymore. This is not this is not for that. This is not a kissing baby's job anymore. This is a business job, and you need a business sense. You need business acumen to take this job, to be an athletic director, because whatever it used to be, and I mean, there was always a business element to it, but whatever the job of an athletic director used to be, it's only business now. It's all business and making the dollars work, because you have to make the dollars work, not just to like try to come out ahead, in your profit margins, all these, like, you have to make the dollars work to field competitive teams and have success in the sports. And I mean, just be completely honest and candid, you need to find a way to make the dollars work to be successful in football and men's basketball. And I hate that we have to have tunnel vision on that, but it's the reality. And like, I have incredible respect for every student athlete at Pitt and every coach at Pitt, because they work really hard. They dedicate their lives to these things. But you know what college sports is right now? And it has been for a while, and maybe it always has been, but you know what it is right now? It's a business, and it's about making money. And step by step, and I've talked about this before, step by step, little by little, every decision that gets made by schools, by athletic departments, by conferences, by the NCAA, by just any element of college athletics, every decision gets made boils down to one question. Will this make us money? period. And it's been that for a while, but there was still like something beautiful about college sports where it wasn't, a lot of it was about money, but there were still decisions that were made for no reason other than just the bizarre world of college. Yes, we're just going to have rankings, and whoever decides a number. I was explaining like the history of college rankings to my family over the weekend. And like my wife and my kids were like, wait, so they didn't even play a championship game? I'm like, no, they didn't. And it was kind of great. It was kind of beautiful that it just didn't make sense. I was explaining to them, we were watching the Notre Dame Northern Illinois game, and I was explaining to them why everybody in the country hates Notre Dame. And I was like, but the one thing about Notre Dame is they make decisions, most of them for money, but at least some of them just because of their own pretension. And I appreciate that because yes, they may be pretentious and condescending, but at least they're doing it for that reason. At least there's like one other reason that's not just money, because everything else is made for, every other decision is made for that reason. And so I'm sorry to these other athletics programs, but like football and men's basketball make the money, and football more than men's basketball. And so where do you need to focus your resources? Where do you need to focus your efforts? Where do you need to focus your work and your biggest dedication of time? It's football. How do you get the money to football? And whether it's NIL or it's revenue sharing or whatever else you could do to support that program, this is your lifeblood. Because football has been paying for everything else. Football and men's basketball pay for everything else. And that's only going to increase. Except now, football and men's basketball need more money because they're going to have, because of the revenue sharing. And so the priorities have to be there. And whoever you hire has to come in and have a business sense for how to support and enhance everything that goes with football and men's basketball. It's just the reality. Matt Presto says, hello, darkness, my old friend. Here we are again in the command center with our leader, Chris. Hey, Matt, I'm glad that, we had the opportunity to do this. It's at least we can get together and talk about it for a little bit. Mark Alexander says, am I tripping, or did they not just sign an extension? No, they didn't sign an extension. Talkus Pitt says, I think something went down behind the scenes that we'll never know about. It must be something bad if they're firing her after an extension. Well, she never got an extension. Again, there was never a contract extension signed. And, she did not get the Northwestern job. They picked someone else. It's not like Pitt signed an extension and convinced her to stay. She came back from the Northwestern situation, having not gotten the job, and had to come back to Pitt and attempt to negotiate on the contract again with far less leverage than she had before the Northwestern situation. And I don't know how much leverage she had. Again, Pitt was only interested in offering her something short term, maybe 1 or 2 years as an extension. She wanted longer. She wanted more. And Pitt wasn't willing to offer it. And so, already from the start, it's clear that there was a disconnect, right, between university leadership and athletic department leadership. There was a disconnect there between Joan Gable and Heather Lyke. There was a situation where a new chancellor comes in, takes stock of the situation, takes stock of the health of the athletic department, and says, you know what? I'm not so sure I want to sign you to a 5-year deal. And we'll sign, a year or two, but I need to know how you're going to fix this. I need to know how you're going to move Pitt forward. And I need to see concrete examples of your plan to do what Pitt needs, not just what Heather Lyke needs. I need concrete examples of how this athletic department is going to be successful and competitive. And I think, those were the conversations over the last week, 2 weeks. We have a super chatter. RJC Man 38 jumps in at the end, says, Jeff Capel and Pat Narduzzi should expect the same. Good call. Whatever. We're here. There's 400 of us hanging out on a Monday morning talking about Pitt firing its athletic director, and you want to talk about how they should fire Pat Narduzzi and Jeff Capel. I appreciate you being a super chatter, and that's why I read that, because you're a super chatter. Thank you, sir. Scott Mitchell says, if the reason behind this really is NIL related, then at least the concept of keeping Pitt revenue sports relevant is supposedly alive. I don't know about NIL related. I can't say why Joan Gable, what ultimately made her decide to do that. But what I can say is that Pitt's athletic department under Heather Lyke's direction dragged its feet on getting on board with NIL. For a while with Pennsylvania law, there was only so much that Pitt could do. There was only so much the athletic department could do to support Alliance 412. But there were still things that could be done. There was support that could be offered, and it wasn't offered. There was a distancing between the athletic department and Alliance 412. Pitt's collective aimed at, gathering NIL money to help bolster the roster for football and men's basketball. And look, the success that Pitt basketball had in the last 2 years is entirely due to NIL. NIL is a big, giant chunk of the success that Pitt had over the last 2 years. Okay? Without the efforts of Alliance 412, Pitt doesn't make the NCAA tournament 2 years ago. They are not on the bubble this past year. Period, point blank, hashtag facts, or whatever it is that kids say these days to state something as unequivocally as they can. Pitt doesn't make the NCAA tournament 2 years ago without NIL. Pitt doesn't get on the bubble last year without NIL. And Pitt's not in the position they are right now without NIL. I'm talking about the basketball team. Okay? It doesn't happen. And that was all the efforts of Alliance 412. Because the athletic department, guided by the leader at the top, dragged its feet and didn't want to get involved. And there's something to be said for, Heather Lyke, and this has been suggested to me by a number of people really over the last couple of years. Her background is in compliance. She came up in compliance. She worked in the NCAA enforcement office, and when she was at Ohio State and Michigan State, these places, her background is compliance. Okay. And I think for a lot of people, when NIL became a thing, a lot of people whose backgrounds are in compliance had a very difficult time adapting to it. I always would say about fans, you might not like donating to NIL, but you got to hold your nose and do it because that's that goes for the administrators too. You might not like it, but you need to hold your nose and dive in because this is what your department needs. This is what your sports need. And they didn't. And they dragged their feet. And as restrictions loosened up and there were more things that athletic departments could do, they still dragged their feet. They knew certain changes were coming. They knew they were going to be able to do more to support Alliance 412, and they dragged their feet. Now, in the past 6 months or so, yes, I'm told they've gotten more involved. They've been doing more. They've been doing more to help Pitt or help Alliance 412, but it's still not even enough. They're still not doing the full amount of what they can do. And that's on Heather Lyke. It is her guidance and her executive team that make that decision. And it's her specifically. An athletic department, yes. And I think NIL is one component of that. Let's see. Grant Sakuda says, what's the benefit of making this move now? Seems like this should have been made over the summer. I think there were efforts made to try to re-sign Heather Lyke. I presume over the summer, I think those conversations were being had because ultimately Joan Gable probably wanted another year or two of stability. She wanted, I think, with a clear plan and a path forward, Joan Gable wanted the stability of having the athletic director in place. And so go for another year or two, hire, take another year with Heather Lyke with a clear plan forward of how she was going to advance the athletic department. And then I think as things kind of came to a head with the Northwestern situation and the fallout since then, it seems like the decision was made, this isn't going to work. We're not going to be able to get on the same page. We're not going to be able to come to terms and get in the same spot. And so the decision's made. I don't think it was strategic. Look, we're doing this in September. I don't know if there's ever a good time. Maybe the summer, but not really sure. WG Runyon 132 says Heather Lyke has a track record. Joan Gable has none that I relate to. Well, she just got hired in the next year. Or she just got hired in the last year. So there's not a lot to go on with Joan Gable, but I mean, she does have experience. And look, the word out of Minnesota when she was the chancellor there, or president, or whatever they call the university leader, and the word from people at Pitt since she's been hired is that she is very committed to athletics. There's no turning off the faucet. It's just looking for better management of the water that comes out. Pat O says having a chancellor that does not seem to have any enthusiasm for athletics is terrifying. Like I say, I would disagree with that assessment. You know, I think that assessment is based on, you know, maybe outside perception. But again, I can only go on what I've been told. And what I've been told is that she does have enthusiasm for athletics. She supports athletics and didn't intend to, again, turn off the faucet of money going to athletics, just wanted it to be managed better, which I think is reasonable. Zach Wells says a family friend went to a donor dinner at Heather Lyke's house on Friday, 8:30. That friend said her language insinuated she was definitely staying. So yeah, that was one of the funny stories. Like during the whole Northwestern flirtation, was that Heather Lyke was going to have this like donor party or dinner or something at her house the night before the season opener against Kent State, that Friday night, which was the week leading up to that game. And so it was like, boy, what's going to happen? And you know, by all accounts, the dinner you know, went down. You know, it happened. You know, she had people over at her house and everything, but you know, I wouldn't be surprised if she gave indications that she planned on staying. Like I say, she was in Cincinnati 2 days ago for the Pitt-Cincinnati game. So I would say this was maybe not something she saw coming. I can't. I mean, it's speculation to say how it all went down. But yeah, all indications are that she intended to stay at Pitt after Northwestern fell through. Scroll here. Scotty Trotter says these statements all sound like talking points from the board of trustees. Lyke was a good AD. She's at a university whose alumni don't donate. You know, I mean, that's okay. Like if you want to perceive it to be that I'm getting talking points from the board of trustees or something like that. I mean, that's your perception. I can tell you that I've heard from multiple people in a variety of walks of life, some in the athletic department, some out of the athletic department, some here, some there, that what I'm telling you is accurate. I like the things I've said about NIL, about the plan for revenue sharing, about the overall financial health of the athletic department. Like I'm not making them up, and I wouldn't say them if I didn't feel like I had gotten them from very good, very reliable sources. I wouldn't come out here and like it would be irresponsible to say some of these things. Okay, to talk about these things and the general state of it. But I've heard it from enough people, and not just in the last like 2 weeks. I mean, some of these conversations I've been having with people over the last like year or two, and maybe longer, about what is really going on in Pitt's athletic department and kind of the state of things. And I think I've had enough people tell me that Pitt's NIL budget is near the bottom of the ACC. I've had enough people tell me that Pitt's debt situation in the athletic department is among the worst in FBS. I've had enough people tell me that there's no clear plan for how to proceed with revenue sharing. Like I have enough people telling me these things that I tend to believe them, and now the athletic director got fired. So there's probably some truth to it. And whether it's a talking point or not, that doesn't make it false. And again, I didn't get an email with talking points. I wish I would. You know how easy it would make it if I would get an email from like a source on the board of trustees just saying like, okay, so here's the deal. There's this, and this. And then I could just like recite those and expound on it. That would make my job a lot easier. There'd be a lot fewer phone calls and text messages and all that. It would be a lot easier. Eric Bruno comes in as a super chatter, says, I think it boils down to what Pitt and Joan Gable emphasize when it comes to athletics. Do they emphasize football, basketball, or Olympic sports? The next hire is going to be telling. Like, you got to emphasize what makes money. And like, I don't mean to be cold and unfeeling about it, but like, you have to emphasize what makes money. Football makes the money. Football costs a lot of money, but football makes the money. You have to support football. You have to support football. And I'm not going to sit here. I think there's a false equivalency if we start talking about, well, they built Victory Heights instead of supporting football. I don't think that's the case. I wouldn't suggest that. I don't believe it. I think they were two separate things. I think there were much needed, long overdue updates for Olympic sports. But you've got to, your next athletic director has to support football. Get through as many comments as we can. Got another, a little less than 10 minutes here. Where was I? Ed Mahoney says, surprised on the timing of the move. I expect more to come out in the following days. NIL fundraising. She seemed to be looking for a new job. New hire will be critical for future Pitt athletics. It's interesting about the looking for a new job because it's not like Northwestern was the first time she interviewed for a different job. I mean, we heard her connected to Ohio State. We heard her connected to Michigan State. At least one of those West Coast jobs, USC or Washington State, maybe both. Like, we heard her connected to a bunch of different jobs over the last 7 years. And it's not entirely atypical. People look for better jobs. People look for other jobs. People try to climb the ladder, right? It's not totally out of, it's not, like I say, it's not atypical. It's not unconventional for an athletic director to interview for other jobs. But she interviewed for a lot. She interviewed for a lot of jobs and didn't get any of them. And you wonder, you wonder if there's something to read into there. You wonder if Pitt got a little bit tired of her looking for other jobs, but you wonder if there's something to read into the fact that she didn't get other jobs. I mean, it's debatable if Northwestern is a lateral move or not. Ohio State is one thing, but, if she was being talked about with like Washington State or something like that, or I forget some of the other programs, but like not all of them, at least some of them felt like probably more or less lateral moves. And so I don't know. I think you could read into it a lot of ways. Another super chatter. RJC Man 38 says, when the AD comes in and you are Jeff or Pat, do you feel good about your resume? I think it's fair to say no. I don't know. I think if you're Pat Narduzzi, you got a pretty nice trophy. One of the few that Pitt has since joining the ACC. And that buys you a little bit of time. Also, I don't know if this is a hire that'll get done. I don't know what the timeline would be for an athletic director hire. They've got an interim AD. If you recall, Jeff Long left Pitt for Arkansas during the 2007 season. And Steve Peterson, I think, was announced on December 1st. So you're looking at a couple months in there where Donna Samft was the interim AD. And so this is a hire that could take a little while. Now, if Joan Gable wants to go back to Minnesota and find the AD that she had there and bring him along, that could be a possibility. And maybe that could happen a little bit quicker. But you're going to hire an AD who's going to have at least an eye on this year's football season and men's basketball season. If Pat Narduzzi has an ACC championship trophy, 2 division titles, 20 games over 2 years in 21 and 22, bounces back, and if he can bounce back from a 3-9 season with a solid year this year, an 8-win season or better, I don't think he should feel too much on the hot seat. If Jeff Capel can do what we expect him to do this year, and I mean, he's got Amsal Delalich, Amsal Delalich. So I mean, how could he not do what we expect him to do? But if Jeff Capel does what we expect him to do this year, then I wouldn't be worried if I was those guys. I think the bigger questions are about how to support and build those sports rather than just firing the head coaches right off the bat. But everybody's got their own preferences and thoughts. There's a lot of Josh Newark says EJ for director of athletics peaked to the Pitt SID. No, thank you. I would not. I would not be interested in working in the University of Pittsburgh athletic department, at least not in the sports information, to deal with people like me. No. Would EJ Borghetti, the current Pitt SID, make a great athletic director? Probably. Does he have the business background? that is needed in this kind of situation? I'm not sure. But do I know that every decision he would make would be with Pitt's best interest in mind? Absolutely. There are Pitt people sort of scattered throughout college athletics. Dan Bartholomew is the athletic director at Western Michigan. He's a younger guy, but he really kind of came up through Pitt and learned the job at Pitt, learned how athletic departments work at Pitt, for better or for worse. He's a guy that I think if you were to hire him, he would make every decision with Pitt's best interest in mind. Marcus Bowman, I think, is at Oklahoma, former Pitt basketball player, and spent a lot of time in Pitt's athletic department. If he were to get hired or something, I think he would make every decision with Pitt's best interest in mind. That's what you need. That's important. But I think you also need that business acumen. You need to be able to run the business that is big-time college athletics. If you want to be a big-time college athletic department, you need to run it like a business. There's so many comments here. I'm not going to be able to get to everybody on this one because we got to run. Pat Narduzzi talks in an hour, and so I wish I could read all your comments. We definitely got all the super chatters in. We appreciate everybody who chimed in as a super chatter, and I appreciate everybody who tuned in today. We got like 400 people watching a live stream at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Monday. It's a lot of fun. I wish we could go longer, but we got to wrap it up. But that's the news. Pitt fires Director of Athletics Heather Lyke. A move that I think was a surprise when the expectation was that she was going to sign a contract extension. But again, if you were following along on Panther-Lair.com over the last couple of weeks, I think we laid out the context of how something like this could happen. We never said that this would happen because I didn't necessarily think this would happen. But with the context I think we put out there, I think you have some idea. And maybe it's not as crazy of a notion as you might have thought or as it might have seemed. But either way, a little bit of news. I'm sure we're going to be talking about this on the Morning Pit tomorrow. But listen, like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. We will have lots more to talk about this week, and the message boards are jumping off at Panther-Lair.com. So if you want to go talk about it, head over to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Again, thanks so much for tuning in today. Have a great rest of your Monday. We'll see if the rest of the day can live up to what today was. But thanks. Like and subscribe. We'll catch up with you on Panther-Lair.com. And tomorrow morning's Morning Pit right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.